everybody, welcome back to Zoo School Live, our winter edition, and today we are meeting with our snowy owl. Some of you guys may have seen her out in the zoo if you've been able to attend our wild lights. She's been pretty active this time of year because, like her name suggests, she really enjoys the winter weather. So Snowy, she's named pretty aptly, very easy to remember, came to us a few years ago. She's actually was born in Canada, and that's where in the wild you can find them. So they are native to the Arctic tundra. So basically, she's from the North Pole. Now, Snowy didn't come from the wild. She was actually born at a breeding facility, and she is a pretty cool animal because she belongs to something called a species survival plan. So Snowy here at the zoo helps us to educate and teach, but if needed, she could go into a breeding program to help raise little owls that could be released into the wild. So this species is one that lives in a pretty specific habitat and unfortunately is impacted by climate change. So as you might think, the tundra, the Arctic Circle, is pretty cold most of the time and it's covered in a lot of snow and ice. So Snowy prefers much cooler temperatures than maybe some of us would like. She is very well adapted to survive in this type of habitat as well. Now, if you look at her feathers, it's pretty easy to see that she has very good camouflage for hiding in the snow. Now, Snowy is a female. She's a girl snowy owl, and that's why she's a little bit darker than what maybe you have seen if you've seen pictures of snowy owls, or even if you've watched a pretty famous movie series called Harry Potter. You might be used to seeing a very white owl. Now, the male owls are going to be pretty much all white. They actually start off a little speckled and then they get whiter throughout their life, whereas Snowy and other female snowy owls, they're going to have these brown speckles all over their body, and this is to help them to blend in. Snowy owls do breed in the tundra, and so they actually don't build nests up in trees like many owls that we would have around here in Pennsylvania. So they would kind of scrape out the dirt and the ice and they would make a nest on the ground. Now, while both parents, both boys and girls, take care of those babies and do sit on the nest, the female is going to be the primary nest sitter. So she has to have those colors to help her blend in and look like a pile of snow and some of the rocks and things. Now, Snowy here is about 10 years old. She is full size, so she won't get too much bigger than this. And this species of owl is one of the largest that we have here in North America. So she weighs around 4 pounds. Now, 4 pounds doesn't sound like a whole lot, but in the bird world it is. If you compare her to one of our largest birds in this area, the bald eagle, they actually weigh upwards of 8 to 10 pounds, so she's not that far off. Birds typically are going to have feathers, right? And those feathers don't weigh a whole lot, and her bones don't either. So her bones are hollow, which allows her to not have a whole lot of weight and allows her to fly. That's why birds can typically fly without any assistance, and we need to use planes and jets and things like that. So she has all those feathers to help her to get around. Snowy owls are what we call a sit and wait predator. So they aren't going to be flying around actively looking for food. They're actually going to find a spot in the tundra and kind of sit on a snow pile or a rock or a post, and they're going to wait for something to move around. Now, in the tundra there aren't a lot of trees, so they can't necessarily get really high up, but they do rely on those really big eyes to help them to see pretty far distances. Owls can see really well into the distance, and they can see pretty well at night. Now, the thing that's a little bit different about Snowy compared to some of our other owls is that she is not necessarily nocturnal. So she's actually what we call diurnal. She's more active during the day than at nighttime. And this is an adaptation for living in the Arctic tundra because many times, seasonally, they go through periods of almost all daylight for days at a time. And then they kind of also swap back to having long periods of nighttime as well. So she's a lot more flexible when it comes to when she's active. So she has those really large eyes to help her see far distances, but they aren't X-ray vision. She can't see under the snow. So to help her with that, she has excellent hearing. Now, you can't see her ears. They are hidden underneath all those fluffy feathers on her face. And her ears are basically just 2 small holes in the side of her head. And many owls have lopsided ears. So that means that one ear is slightly higher than the other. And this helps them to navigate and figure out exactly where a sound is coming from. So the way a snowy owl will hunt in the tundra, they'll sit, they'll watch, but they'll also listen, and they can hear animals moving underneath the snow. And one of their favorite types of food is something called a lemming, which is a small rodent-like animal. It sort of looks a little bit like a hamster. And those lemmings can burrow under the snow. So Snowy would sit, she'd wait, she'd be very quiet. And as soon as she heard something approaching, tunneling in the snow, she would attack. And the way she's gonna do that, she's gonna use those huge feet. So I'm gonna see if she'll show off her feet a little bit here. I'm gonna give her a snack and see if she'll lift up those wings and show off those feet. There you go. You can see she's got huge, huge feet with really long, sharp claws. We call those talons. And like other birds of prey, she's going to use those talons to grab her food. So she is a carnivore and a very good hunter. So she would listen, she would pounce down with those big feet, grab her food, and then she has a nice sharp hooked beak to help her rip and tear. That's kind of like her fork and knife. So snowy owls are amazing hunters in a very snow-covered habitat. Here at the zoo, Snowy gets a mixture of mice and rats, so she doesn't hunt for lemmings. Instead, we use her food for training, so when she comes out to do different programs, we do use her food to reward her, to tell her she's doing a pretty good job. You can see that nice big beak in action. Now, like other owls, they do have what's called facial discs. Now, they're not as obvious on her. Facial discs are basically, if you look at an owl's face, those big round circles, and those are not just there for looks. Those actually help to channel sound back to their ears. And for Snowy, she's got a lot of fluff on her face, and that's kind of her general demeanor all over, because she does need very thick feathers to keep her insulated and warm. So if you took away all of Snowy's feathers, remember she only weighs about 4 pounds, she'd be pretty small. So they have multiple layers. They have a down layer underneath the ones on top to help insulate her. And then she, of course, has different feathers on her wings for helping her to fly. So without those feathers, she would get pretty cold in the Arctic tundra, and she can't wear a hat or mittens or gloves or coats like we do. So those feathers are really important for keeping her safe in a very cold climate. Now you might notice that Snowy's a little noisy. Snowy owls do not necessarily hoot like some of our other owl species. Now the call that she's making right now is kind of her general chatter. So when she sees people, and especially when she comes out to do programs and she knows she can get some snacks, she likes to just casually remind us that she would like more snacks, please. But in the wild, they do make a couple different noises. The males actually make a barking sound. It almost sounds like a dog. It's very deep. Whoo. And the females can make this scream, of course, when they're talking to one another. And they're most likely going to be talking to one another during the breeding season. Otherwise, snowy owls are pretty quiet. Now, looking at Snowy, it'd be hard to imagine that. But in the wild, they don't make a lot of noise because, again, they are ambush predators. They don't want to alert any other animals around them that they are in the area. So they don't just sit out all day in the snow screaming and calling. They're actually pretty quiet in their native habitat. Now, while snowy owls aren't found here in Pennsylvania year-round, they do occasionally make an appearance. So when a snowy owl lays eggs, they could have 3 to 11 eggs. That's a lot of babies. And every once in a while, there's a population boom. So there's so many baby owls that are born that there's not really a lot of food to support them all in their normal habitat. So what we'll see those years is a migration. So sometimes snowy owls will move out and search for more food and a little bit more space during the winter in particular. So people have spotted them as far south as Maryland and here in Pennsylvania and along the Jersey Shore. And it's always a really cool thing to see such an amazing, beautiful creature make a visit, even if it is just for the holidays. So oftentimes you'll hear about it on the news, or birders will get really excited and flock to try to see them. And they typically will hang out in places where there's a lot of open space. So often they're seen on beaches and sometimes even on skyscrapers in cities, because they're used to kind of having a nice outlook and place to sit and watch. So they kind of find their way into some weird places every once in a while when they do have to head out and find some space. Now, they won't stay in those areas. They will head back to the tundra, but it does happen every few years or so because there is a boom in the snowy owl population. Yes, I know you're very chatty. So if we take a look at those eyes again, you can see they're pretty large. Now remember, if we took away her feathers, her skull would actually be very small, and her eyes make up most of that skull. They don't have a whole lot of space there for much else. You know, we usually think of owls as being very wise, but they have a surprisingly small brain. Now that doesn't mean that Snowy isn't very good at what she does, but those eyes take up a lot of space, and that's very important. Owls are going to use those eyes again to search out for food and watch for danger, and their eyes are designed a little bit differently than ours. So Snowy doesn't have rounded eyeballs. Her eyeballs are actually more cone shaped, and so they don't move in their sockets. So you'll never see a snowy owl roll its eyes. Now, I believe that Snowy does this internally probably every day when we're working with her, because she's got a little bit of attitude, but she can't physically do it. So instead, owls will turn their heads, and she's demonstrating this very nicely for us because she's checking out all the different sights and sounds. They can actually turn their heads about 270 degrees. That's farther than we can, for sure. We can turn our heads maybe 180 degrees if we're super flexible. Now, she has to do that to make up for the fact that, unfortunately, her eyes don't move in their sockets. Now, she's able to do that because she has twice as many neck bones as you and I. So we have 7 neck bones. She has 14. So she is much more flexible. This is also important when they're flying. So while snowy owls are usually going to sit and wait and watch for their food, they will occasionally fly over the tundra to search for food as well. And while they're flying, they want their head to be able to focus on what they're looking at on the ground and not move every time they flap their wings or have to kind of turn or make a spin in the air. So having a very flexible neck is a very important part of their hunting strategy as well. Now, I mentioned that Snowy is part of a species survival plan. We don't, unfortunately, know a whole lot about how snowy owls are doing in the wild. Owls in particular are very aloof and secretive, so they're not really easy to study sometimes. And if you imagine, being a scientist in the Arctic tundra could be a really challenging job. We are not adapted to living in that kind of habitat like an owl is. So she would need, in order to study her, you would need to be able to find the owls to begin with. And this isn't always something that can be done because they do have a pretty wide range. They could cover a space of several 100 miles in their territory. And again, she's well camouflaged. She's designed to hide. So unfortunately, we don't know exactly how many snowy owls there are out in the wild, but we are pretty sure that they are facing some challenges from climate change. So whether or not the Arctic is heating up really, really quickly, or if it's just a seasonal shift every once in a while, it is something that's going to challenge them because they rely on the animals that live in the tundra, and those animals also rely on the snow and the ice and the season that they're used to. So we're hoping that with Snowy we can educate people. We love bringing her out in the zoo. You'll most likely see her this time of year. As I said, she's been very active during wild lights. She doesn't come out much in the summer though because she is very temperature sensitive. In the summertime, we kind of give Snowy a break. She gets a vacation. We do have her come out every once in a while so we can weigh her and so we can make sure she's healthy. But for the most part, she gets to relax because she doesn't really enjoy the sun or the summer like many of us do. This is her time of year to shine. Now, Snowy will be, as I said, she's 10 years old this year. She could live, though, to be into her 30s. So owls have a very long lifespan, especially under human care. So she will require care for a long, long time here at the zoo. And many of you guys have been awesome and have been donating things and going onto our Amazon checklist and assisting us, especially through this really tough year. Snowy has a few things out there that she'd love to receive for the holidays. If you're interested, you should definitely check that Amazon wish list out and check out our donation page. Now, unfortunately, you can't really donate mice to the zoo, but that is a big thing that we need. Snowy eats a lot every single day. She eats the equivalent of about 3 to 5 mice every day, and that's every single day of the year, no matter what, and sometimes a little bit extra in the winter time, because she does need to build up a little bit of body fat to keep nice and warm. Now, if you guys have any questions, if you haven't already, go ahead and put them in the comments. We'll see if we have any now that we can answer.
Someone is asking, what does she use her beak for?
Great question. So Snowy's beak is specially designed for ripping and tearing. So if she catches food with those big talons, remember those big feet, she would use her beak to tear it up into smaller pieces. Now, they don't always do that. If Snowy were to catch something like a small lemming or a vole, and she needed to eat and get out of there fast, she would actually swallow her food whole. So owls can stretch their mouths open really, really far, and they can swallow their prey in one big gulp. And this helps them to eat their food very quickly, because it's not always safe to stay on the ground and have a nice, slow, casual meal. There could be predators that could sneak up on you. Things like Arctic fox and wolves and things like that could come up and try to eat a snowy owl. So she may want to eat her food very, very quickly, and in doing that, she'll swallow it whole. Now later on, just like other owls, after she's eaten a meal, she will actually cast up a pellet. So owl pellets are essentially like a hairball. They don't actually digest the food or the hair or the feathers if they were to eat another bird. Instead, they kind of store it, and then later on, they will actually cough it back up. And this helps to prevent them from wasting energy digesting things that really don't have much nutritional value for them. So she likes all the meat and the juices and the good stuff, and then later on, coughs up a pellet, just like other owls.
Someone asked if Snowy can fly.
Snowy can fly, as she is fully flighted. She is one of the few owls that live here at the zoo who's actually not a rescue bird. As I said, she did come from a breeding facility and is part of a very special breeding plan. So she is fully flighted, and she can move around and fly around in her enclosure. We don't fly her out in the zoo just quite yet. We'd love to do that with her someday, but in order to do that, we would have to take a little bit extra time for training, and we would also need some special equipment. We would need GPS equipment to make sure if she did decide to go for a little joy fly away from us, we could track her down safely. So she can fly. She is not going to fly around the zoo right now, but she does have the ability, and she has a pretty awesome wingspan. I'll see if she wants to show that off for you guys again. Hey. There we go. So she has around a 4 to 5 foot wingspan. Pretty impressive.
Someone is asking how we keep her cool and comfortable in the summer.
That's an excellent question. So Snowy has a pretty sweet setup. She actually has her own personal fan. So if she does get a little too warm, she does live outside year-round, and she's lived in our area for most of her life, so she has adjusted to it. It's not like she came straight from the Arctic tundra. But she has a really big fan that we turn on warm days. She also gets big bowls of ice and very cold marble slabs to stand on. And then we provide her shade with shade cloths and tarps as well. So if it's really super duper hot, we can bring her inside. We try not to do that though, because it's actually a little bit more stressful for her to not be in her own home. But she has an even better setup than I really do at my house. She keeps nice and cool during the summer.
Someone mentioned that there was a sighting by the Philadelphia Art Museum, which is pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Others are asking if we're open today, and the answer is yes, we sure are.
We are open. In fact, tonight is our last night of wild lights. So if you haven't had a chance to come check out the zoo at nighttime, we have all of our lights set up, and we will have animal greets. Now, Miss Snowy will not be out tonight because she is on zoo school today. So after this, she's going to get to relax a little bit and get ready for the new year. But you guys are definitely welcome to come out and check out wild lights. And we are open today 12 to 4.
Lots of people complimenting on how beautiful she is, and she sure is, and she knows it. And also question, does she have any friends, and does she enjoy enrichment?
Great question. So as far as friends go, Snowy's kind of, she's okay with being on her own. She does not live with any other owls, and she doesn't live in the same space as some of our other birds, but that's how she prefers it. They are solitary in the wild. They do mate for life, so in the Arctic tundra they would get together around May and June and start their breeding season, but then after that's done, after they've raised the young, they're kind of back on their own. So she doesn't really have many friends. I like to think she's my friend, and we have another trainer, Rebecca, who's behind the camera today. We work with her pretty frequently, and we have a good relationship with her, but owls are not necessarily always super friendly. Snowy mostly prefers us for our tidbit handing abilities. As far as enrichment goes, we do bring her out in the zoo for walks, and we take her out so she can see many different things, and that's a form of enrichment, giving her something new to look at. She particularly enjoys staring at our porcupine exhibit sometimes, and she's not a super big fan of Slash, the red panda, but we do take her for walks in the zoo. And then sometimes we will hide her enrichment or hide her food and things as well. So we use little balls and things like that to make her, challenge her a little bit more for finding that food. Since she's not really hunting here at the zoo, she's getting her food in other ways. So we do sometimes give her enrichment, but she's not quite as playful as some of our other animals.
And somebody mentioned there's also been a sighting out near Honeybrook, which is super cool.
That is cool.
Lastly, we have one more viewer asking what her call means.
What her call means. So that noise you guys are hearing, that scream, that one right there, that's just her general call she makes to us when she is excited or when she's looking for a snack, when she is just kind of curious about something. You might notice when she does eat, she makes a little bit more of a kind of a chittering sound. We'll see if she'll do it. There you go. That's just her little happy sound, as we call it. So Snowy, since she has lived with people pretty much her whole life, she does associate us with good, pleasant things like food and enrichment things. So that's just kind of her general saying, hey, I'd like another tidbit, please, or hey, I see you. All right, guys, thanks so much for joining us today on Zoo School Winter Edition. I hope everybody has a wonderful and safe holiday and new year, and we will see you guys in 2021.